the catering deposit, the venue rental, the audiovisual package, the lighting rig, the open bar for 300 guests, the custom stage, the printed programs with his name on the front in gold foil. I paid for all of it. Every single line item on that invoice, I signed off on. Not because I was asked nicely, not because I owed anyone anything. I paid because he was my son, and I believed in him, and I thought that was what a father was supposed to do. I was 63 years old, standing at the entrance of the Hargrove Event Center in downtown Chicago, wearing the suit my late wife had picked out for me 8 years ago. The navy one, she said, made me look distinguished, and a man in a black earpiece held out one hand and told me my name was not on the list. I said it again. My name. He checked his tablet a second time, scrolled, looked up at me with the kind of blank expression they train people to have when they want to seem professional, while delivering something humiliating. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step back from the entrance." Behind him, through the glass doors, I could see the crowd already inside. Investors in tailored jackets, local press with lanyards around their necks, my son's business partner, a man named Derek, laughing near the bar with a glass of champagne in his hand. The room was full of people, celebrating the launch of a company I had spent 2 years and $2 million helping to build. And I was standing on the sidewalk. I did not raise my voice. I want to be clear about that. I did not make a scene. I did not grab the man by the lapel or demand to speak to a manager, or pull out my phone to start recording. I am 63 years old. I have buried a wife. I have survived a recession that took everything I had built in my 40s and forced me to start over at 50. I have learned, slowly and painfully, that the moments in life that break you are almost never the loud ones. They are the quiet ones, the ones that arrive without warning, dressed in ordinary clothes. I took one step back. I straightened my jacket, and I said, "Of course. I apologize for the confusion." Then I walked back to my rental car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. My son's name is Nathan. He is 34 years old. He has my forehead and his mother's eyes, and when he was 7, he used to fall asleep on the couch with his head on my shoulder while we watched baseball, and I would sit perfectly still for hours because I did not want to wake him. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest of this. I want you to know who I was thinking about when I sat in that parking garage and tried to understand what had just happened. Not the company, not the money. My son, age 7, asleep against my shoulder. Nathan came to me 2 years ago with a pitch deck and a dream, and the kind of energy that only people who have never failed at anything important can sustain. He wanted to build a platform, a logistics software company, targeting mid-size freight carriers. He had a co-founder, Derek, who had connections in the industry. He had a prototype. He had a plan. What he did not have was capital. I had recently sold a commercial property I had owned since my early 50s. The sale had taken longer than expected, and the return was modest by the standards of people who had never worried about money, but it was mine. It was the result of 30 years of careful decisions and small sacrifices, and it was what I had instead of a pension. I gave Nathan $1 million in exchange for a 20% equity stake, properly documented, properly signed. 6 months later, when the prototype needed refinement, and Derek convinced Nathan they needed to scale the team faster, Nathan came back. He sat across from me at my kitchen table with that look on his face, the same look he had at 17 when he wanted to borrow the car, and I gave him another million, $2 million total. 20% of a company I believed in because my son told me to believe in it. I attended every quarterly review they held for investors. I sat in those folding chairs in their WeWork office and listened to Nathan present revenue projections and user acquisition numbers, and I asked reasonable questions, and I was proud of him. Genuinely, deeply proud. Not because of the business, because of the way he spoke, the confidence in his voice, the way he handled the room. His mother would have been proud too. I thought about that every time. The launch event was the culmination of everything. A Series A round had just closed $3 million from a venture firm out of San Francisco, and Nathan wanted to celebrate publicly. Announce the company to the city. Make it real. He had booked the Hargrove Event Center 8 weeks in advance, and I had received a call from his assistant, a young woman named Priya, asking if I would help cover the venue deposit because the timing was awkward between the funding close and the actual wire hitting the account. I transferred $12,000 without asking for paperwork. I told myself it was nothing. A gesture. The cost of believing in someone. I sat in the parking garage for 40 minutes. I have learned over the years not to make decisions while I am still in the feeling. My wife used to say that she was a social worker for 25 years, and she understood things about the human nervous system that I am only now beginning to appreciate. She would say, "Wait until the feeling has somewhere to sit before you ask it any questions." So I waited, and then I picked up my phone and called my attorney, a woman named Carol who has handled my business affairs for 11 years and who has the particular gift of never sounding surprised by anything. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "And the equity agreement, the documentation is current?" I said yes. She said, "Give me 20 minutes. Don't go anywhere." I sat in the car. The garage smelled like exhaust and damp concrete. Somewhere, 2 levels above me, a car alarm was going off. I looked at the photo on my phone lock screen, Nathan, and me at Wrigley Field 3 summers ago. Both of us laughing at something neither of us could probably remember now. Hot dogs in our hands, the afternoon light coming in from the left and making everything look gold. I did not delete it. Carol called back in 18 minutes. What she told me was this. 2 months prior, Nathan and Derek had filed an amendment to the company's operating agreement. The amendment restructured the equity table. My 20% stake had been reclassified as a non-voting advisory interest with a capped return that, in practical terms, meant I had no meaningful ownership in the event of an acquisition or IPO. They had not notified me. They had not sent the amendment to my email. They had filed it quietly with their corporate attorney and moved on. The loans, the $2 million I had transferred over 18 months, had never been formally converted to equity. Nathan had always said we would handle the paperwork when things settled down. I had trusted him. I was not on the cap table in any meaningful way. I was not on the guest list. I was, as far as the company was concerned, not particularly relevant. I said, "Carol, what do I have?" She said, "More than they think." This is the part I need to explain carefully, because I do not want you to think I acted out of anger. Anger is a fire, and it burns the person holding it as much as anything else. What I felt, sitting in that parking garage, was not anger. It was something colder and quieter. It was clarity. I had 2 things that Nathan and Derek had apparently forgotten about. The first was a promissory note. When I transferred the first $1 million, Carol had insisted over Nathan's mild objection that it felt overly formal for a family arrangement that we documented as a convertible loan with a personal guarantee from Nathan. The conversion to equity had never been properly executed. That meant, legally, the money was still a loan. A $2 million loan with my son's personal signature on it. The second was something I had almost not done. 6 weeks before the launch event, I had received a call from a man named Alan Griggs, who identified himself as a former employee of Nathan's company. Alan had been a senior developer who had left after a dispute over compensation. He had information he wanted to share. I had met him for coffee, half out of curiosity and half out of the vague unease that had been growing in me for several months, without my being able to name it. Alan showed me documents, internal communications, emails between Nathan and Derek discussing the equity amendment, and more importantly, discussing a side arrangement with one of the Series A investors, a revenue-sharing agreement that had not been disclosed in the offering documents. It was the kind of thing that made venture lawyers very nervous. I had taken photographs of everything Alan showed me. I had forwarded them to Carol that same afternoon and told her to keep them somewhere safe. I had not told Nathan. At the time, I told myself I was waiting for the right moment to have a conversation. Looking back, I think some part of me already knew there was not going to be a conversation. Some part of me had already understood what was coming and had started, quietly and without acknowledging it, to prepare. Carol told me to sit tight. She said she needed to make 2 phone calls, and she would get back to me within the hour. I sat in the car. I thought about the suit. I thought about the way my wife had held it up in the department store dressing room and said, "That one, that's the one," with the certainty she brought to everything. I thought about the fact that I had worn it today because I wanted to feel like she was there. I thought about Nathan at 7, asleep on my shoulder. I thought about what she would have said about all of this, about the amendment, about the guest list, about the parking garage. I knew exactly what she would have said. She would have said, "You already know what you have to do. You're just waiting for permission. Stop waiting." Carol called back in 53 minutes. She had spoken to the venture firm's legal counsel. Not to report anything, just to ask a few questions about standard disclosure practices and operating agreements of this type. The call had been careful and professional, but legal counsels talk to each other, and the questions Carol asked were specific enough that the implications were clear. By the time she hung up, she had confirmed what Alan's documents suggested. The undisclosed side arrangement was, at minimum, a significant compliance problem. She had also sent a formal demand letter to Nathan's corporate attorney, invoking the promissory note and requesting repayment of $2 million plus interest within 30 days, citing material misrepresentation in the equity conversion discussions. Inside the Hargrove Event Center, the launch event was probably just getting underway. Nathan was probably on the stage I had helped pay for, in front of the guests I had helped feed, announcing the company to the world. Carol asked me if I wanted to go home. I said no. I said I would like to go back inside. She said, "They won't let you in." I said, "I know, but I would like to be nearby." I do not entirely know why I said that. There was nothing I needed to see. Everything that needed to happen was already in motion, documents filed, letters sent, the machinery of consequence beginning its slow and certain work. I did not need to watch my son's face. I am not a cruel man. I have never wanted to humiliate anyone, not even people who had earned it. But I think I needed to be close. I think I needed to be in the same city block as the thing that was happening, so that it would feel real to me, so that I would not drive home to my empty house and spend the night wondering if I had imagined all of it. I walked back to the entrance. The same man with the earpiece was standing there. He saw me coming and his posture shifted slightly. I held up one hand to let him know I was not trying to get in. I stood on the sidewalk, maybe 15 feet from the glass doors, and I put my hands in my pockets. About 20 minutes later, the doors opened, and two men in suits came out, moving quickly. I recognized one of them as the venture firm's representative, a man I had seen at one of the quarterly reviews. I did not know his name, but I recognized the way he carried himself. He was on his phone. He was not smiling. 30 seconds after that, Derek came out. He was not on the phone. He was looking at his own phone with the expression of a man reading something he cannot fully process. He looked up, scanned the sidewalk, and his eyes landed on me. He stared for a moment. He looked back down at his phone. He did not come over. He did not say anything. He went back inside. 10 minutes after that, Nathan came out. He was still wearing his presentation jacket. He was alone. He stopped when he saw me, and for a long moment neither of us moved. There were people passing on the sidewalk between us. Somewhere down the block a food truck was playing music. He walked over to me. He said, "How did you?" and then stopped. I said, "Carol sent the letter about 45 minutes ago." He looked at me the way people look when they are calculating, when they are running through scenarios, when the version of events they had been operating inside of has just collapsed, and they are trying to find a new one. I have seen that look on the faces of people who owed me money, on contractors who had missed deadlines, on a city inspector once who had told me a property was up to code when it was not. I had never expected to see it on my son. He said, "Dad, this is a misunderstanding. The equity structure was..." I said, "Nathan." He stopped. I said, "I need you to not explain it to me right now. I need you to just stand here for a minute." He closed his mouth. The music from the food truck drifted down the block. Somewhere inside the Hargrove Event Center, 300 people were standing around a stage with a custom lighting rig and gold foil programs, waiting to understand what was happening. I said, "I wore this suit because your mother picked it out. I wore it because I wanted to feel like she was here tonight. I genuinely thought that she would have wanted to see this, that she would have been proud of you." He looked at the ground. I said, "I'm not going to pretend I understand what you were thinking. I'm not going to pretend this doesn't hurt. It does. More than the money. This hurts, and you should know that." He said quietly, "Dad," I said, "but I also need you to understand that I am 63 years old, and I have been building things my entire life, and I know exactly what I am doing. The promissory note is valid. Carol is thorough. Whatever you and Derek were trying to construct, it was built on the assumption that I wouldn't notice, or wouldn't act, or would let things go because you're my son. That was the mistake. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. I do not know if it was grief or fear or some combination of both, and I've spent a lot of time since then deciding it does not matter. I said, I love you. That is not in question. But love is not the same as allowing yourself to be erased. I straightened my jacket. I said, your lawyers will be in touch with Carol. And I walked back to my car. The drive back to my hotel took 20 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. The city moved past the windows in the particular way cities do at night, lit up and indifferent, full of people living their own versions of everything. Their own kitchens and parking garages and suits chosen by people who were gone now. I thought about the fact that I was hungry. I thought about the fact that I had not eaten since noon. I thought about stopping somewhere, but I kept driving. I have been a father for 34 years. Before that, I was a son, and before that, I was just a boy in a small house in central Ohio who wanted to build things and did not yet know that building things meant you were also building the possibility of losing them. Nobody tells you that. Nobody sits you down and explains that the more you put into something, the more surface area it has for breaking. My wife understood it. She had been raised harder than I had, in a household where nothing was guaranteed, and love was not expressed so much as demonstrated through endurance. And she brought to everything she did a kind of practical tenderness that I have never been able to fully replicate. She loved Nathan with her whole self, and she also told him no, regularly, calmly, without apology. She told him the world did not owe him anything. She told him comfort was a gift, not a right. She told him that the only things worth keeping were the things you had earned. I had not always reinforced that. I had softened things when she was tough. I had said yes when she had said let him figure it out. I had written checks when she would have written lessons. I am not absolved by grief, but I think about it. I think about the years after she was gone, when it was just Nathan and me, and how much easier it was to give him things than to give him the harder, more necessary stuff that she had always been better at. The top comment on the video, I am telling you about not this story. I mean the version of this story that exists in other people's lives, in the comment sections of channels like this one. In the 3 a.m. thoughts of men my age sitting in quiet houses, the comment that gets the most likes is always the same. It says something like, you gave him too much. And the person writing it is not wrong. They're just pointing at the symptom instead of the wound. I gave him too much because I was afraid that without the things I gave him, he would not stay. And he left anyway. Not physically, he was still 30 miles away, in a condo I had co-signed the lease on 3 years ago, with a company that was now in serious legal and financial disarray. But he had left the version of our relationship that I had been maintaining, with checks and signatures and $12,000 venue deposits. He had left it some time ago and simply not told me. I do not blame him for everything. I want to be honest about that, because I think honesty is the only thing I have left that is entirely mine. I raised a boy who learned that problems could be solved with money because I solved problems with money. I raised a boy who thought that relationships could survive any damage as long as the other person kept showing up because I kept showing up. I raised a boy who did not fully understand what it meant to lose something because I had worked very hard to make sure he never had to find out. The legal process took 7 months. The promissory note held. The undisclosed side arrangement in the Series A documents became a problem large enough that the venture firm eventually initiated their own review, which is a story that belongs to other people and that I was not centrally involved in. Nathan and Derek settled. The company did not launch in the way they had planned. Whether it survives in some form, I do not know. Derek, I have not spoken to since that night on the sidewalk. Nathan called me for the first time 6 weeks after the launch event. It was a Sunday morning. I was in my kitchen making coffee. The phone rang, and I looked at his name on the screen, and I stood there for 3 full rings before I answered. He did not apologize immediately. I appreciated that, actually. An immediate apology would have felt like another transaction, a payment made to close an account. Instead, he said he wanted to explain. Not to excuse anything, just to explain. I said I would listen. It took about an hour. He told me about the pressure from Derek, about the advice from a business attorney who had told him the equity restructuring was standard practice, about the way he had convinced himself that my return would ultimately be better under the new structure about the ways he had not examined his own motivations carefully enough. He cried at one point, not dramatically. Nathan has never been dramatic, just the kind of quiet crying that happens when something you have been carrying gets too heavy. I said, I believe that you convinced yourself of things. He said, that's not an excuse. I said, no, it isn't. We sat on the phone in silence for a while. I said, I need you to understand something about the suit. He said, what suit? I said, the Navy one. The one I wore that night. He was quiet. I said, I wore it because I wanted your mother to be there. Because I wanted to feel like the family I thought we were the family she built was in that room. And when that man with the earpiece told me I wasn't on the list, the thing that broke me wasn't the money. The thing that broke me was the suit. You understand? He said, yes. I said, I don't know what we are now. I don't know what this looks like going forward. I know that I'm your father, and that doesn't stop. But I also know that I spent a long time funding a version of our relationship that was only going in one direction, and I'm not able to do that anymore. Not because of the money. Because I'm 63 and I don't have time to pretend. He said, I know. I said, call me on Sunday. Not to talk about business. Not to talk about lawyers. Just to call. He said he would. That was 4 months ago. He has called every Sunday since then, without fail. We talk about baseball. We talk about the neighborhood where he grew up. Last month he came for dinner and we sat at the kitchen table and ate the chicken recipe his mother used to make, which I have gotten slightly better at over the years. And he told me about a new job he had taken with a logistics company, a real one, with a salary and benefits, and someone else's money on the line instead of mine. I said, how does it feel? He said, harder. More real. I said, yes. I did not say I told you so. I thought about saying it for about half a second, and then I let it go. There is no version of those words that makes anything better. There is only the chicken on the table and the Sunday calls and the fact that he is still 30 miles away, and still, occasionally, mine. I think about the promissory note sometimes. I think about the 7 months of legal back and forth, the emails I read late at night on my phone, the settlement paperwork Carol walked me through with her usual calm efficiency. I got back less than I put in. That is almost always how it works. But I got back more than nothing. And more importantly, I got back something that cannot be measured in dollar amounts. I got back the right to be in the room, not the Hargrove Event Center, not any particular room. I mean the room of my own life. The right to exist in my own story as something other than a source of funding. The right to be a person who my son looks at across a dinner table and sees as a person, not a resource. That is worth something. I believe that. There are men my age who have given everything to their families and received nothing in return, and spent the last years of their lives in a silence that is not peace, but just the absence of anyone left to disappoint them. I have sat next to those men at doctors' offices and church, and at the kinds of casual neighborhood gatherings you attend when you live alone and want to feel like you are still part of something. I have seen it in their faces, not bitterness, exactly, but a kind of used-up quality, as if they have been run through something and came out the other side lighter in all the wrong ways. I do not want that. I have never wanted that. My wife used to say the hardest thing about loving people was that you had to keep choosing it, even when it cost you something. She said love was not a feeling, it was a practice. And like any practice, it required discipline and repetition and the willingness to fail at it and come back anyway. She was right. She was right about most things. I still have the photo on my phone. Nathan and me at Wrigley Field. The gold light. The hot dogs. Whatever we were laughing at. I have looked at it 100 times since that night on the sidewalk, and I have not deleted it once. I do not know if that makes me foolish or faithful. I think, at 63, I have decided that the distance between those two things is smaller than I once believed. I still have the suit. I will wear it again, somewhere, sometime, for something worth wearing it for. I start the engine. I go home.